Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to the December Chicagoland SharePoint Users Group session. I'm the chairman and host, Mark Vogt with Emtec Consulting. We have a couple of other local regular guest presenters, Michael Blumenthal, Ralph Rivas, that are also going to be presenting with us. Today is going to be a special day. We're actually going to spend time looking backwards on what we as a users group have experienced, what growth we've seen, the topics that we've covered in 2018. And that's going to give us the warm, fuzzy feeling to spend a very large portion of today's session looking ahead and discussing where we want it to go. Why? Because this is a users group session, not a Mark group session, and it's steered by you guys. So we want to get as much feedback as we possibly can from you. Let me do a little resizing of a window here, and then we're going to look at the agenda. Today's agenda is going to be talking a little bit about the Saturday morning sessions that we tried in November and how very successful they were. We'll be handing the SharePoint Big Picture over to Michael Blumenthal. I'll also give Michael a chance to talk about SharePoint Fest 2018 that was right here in Chicago just last week. Then we're going to do a review of everything that we covered in 2018. And by the time we're done with that, we're going to look ahead and start discussing where we want to go as a users group in 2019. That said, we'll move on to the next slide. In November, 2 different Saturday mornings, we tentatively tried something that I called an app in a Saturday morning. We had 3 people show up on the first Saturday. We had 6 people show up on the second Saturday. And everybody stayed the full 4 hours. In fact, some of them stayed for 5. What does that tell me? It struck a chord, you guys, that there's actually a lot of topics that we try to cover in our little monthly 1-hour session on one Wednesday each month that need more information. They need a deep dive, so that I'm convinced that there is a lot of potential for these, we'll just call them Saturday mornings, that are going to happen monthly in 2019. And one of the things I'll be asking you guys for are, what topics are you willing to come in for 3 hours, 4 hours, no more than that? And we're going to be at DeVry. They give us free classroom space there. Way to go, DeVry, in Bartlett. And we're going to dive in a little bit deeper in that little one morning, one Saturday each month to try to get in a little bit deeper. But the upshot was it was wildly successful. Kudos and thank you to the people that helped assist with all of that, including Craig Yonke and the SharePoint Saturday team. I appreciate it very much. And as ever, the people at DeVry that were gracious enough to grant us access to all of their computing and classroom resources for free. That was really incredible of them. So watch for more of that in 2019. Let's see, I'm going to skip this one. We're going to go back to, Mike, I'm just going to segue over to you in the SharePoint Big Picture. Michael wants to talk a little bit about some takeaways that he had from SharePoint and from SharePoint Fest. Mike, are you ready?
Yes,
Michael?
Yes, I am.
All right, handing over to you, sir.
Okay.
The stage is yours. We can see your screen.
Okay. Let me make sure I'm sharing that in the right way. Let me.
Okay. Look pretty good. We're seeing what looks like your OneNote, and you were telling us that this was a takeaway that you got from last week's SharePoint Fest.
Yes. So I attended SharePoint Fest for 3 of the 5 days that it was in town. SharePoint Fest Chicago comes to Chicago once a year in December at McCormick Place, and it's a paid event, professional conference, kind of like a little sibling to Ignite. Ignite being run by Microsoft, SharePoint Fest being run by a private company headed by a gentleman by the name of David Wilhelm. And they bring speakers from all over the country and possibly some global pull as well to give sessions and workshops. First 2 days are workshops, next 3 days are sessions. I attended particularly focused on SharePoint intranets. Lately, I've been working a lot with Teams, but I recently I've got a project now to make my employer's intranet mobile friendly, and I thought I had a good understanding of how to do that, and went to talk to a bunch of people at SharePoint Fest and realized that I was missing a key element of the picture. So if you think about your traditional intranet, especially those you built with SharePoint 2013 on-premise, it's probably a deep hierarchy of publishing sites. So you might have your home page and lots of subsites and lots of subsites, and going just maybe many levels deep and lots of subsites. And this is very common. And in our environment, we have, I think it's 139 sites in a hierarchy, some as deep as 6 levels deep. And as you know, or hopefully everyone knows by now, all modern SharePoint sites, that is the ones that are would use modern user experience and are natively mobile friendly, when you create a new communication site or a new team site, they're done as a site in its own site collection. So the architectural model that we're going to is very flat, where every site is its own site collection, and there's no nesting. You should really have no subsites. Every subsite should become its own site collection. So realizing that, I realized I had a lot more effort to turn this into that. And so that was eye-opening and very informative. The other thing that I learned is that there's, if you think about all these site collections, they sit in one of 3 places. They've got your root site collection, you have /sites, and you have /teams. And you really want to be doing all of your sites in here, in one of these site collections, and in one of these managed paths. So, and the root site collection is a bit special, and Microsoft is actually recommending against using it for your intranet. So historically, we always thought the intranet belonged to the root site collection. In modern SharePoint, you really want all your sites, including your intranet, to be under the sites or teams managed path. And in fact, Microsoft itself, their intranet is called MSW, and it's at sites MSW in their Microsoft.SharePoint.com SharePoint tenant. And so that was eye-opening for me, and a good reminder in some cases, and eye-opening in other cases. The flat architecture is really important. And I mean, the end user experience doesn't have to be flat, because you have hub sites which can portray a hierarchical structure, but the underlying architecture should be flat. And there's a number of benefits to that as well. I mean, easier manageability. Should you need to move sites around, it's like, especially if you join things with hubs, you can move sites between hubs very easily. There's none of the lift and shift that you had to do when everything was a subsite. You've got better security management, because each site collection can have its own security policies. And generally, this is the architecture that Microsoft is pushing toward. So this is what you can expect.
Sure. And Michael, wouldn't you say that this also represents literally a step back to some of Microsoft's fundamental building blocks of SharePoint, which is the site collection itself? It was never really Microsoft's intention to create these wildly hierarchical sites inside a single site collection. Instead, right from the beginning, everybody, SharePoint was architected to expect myriad site collections out there, that everybody was going to be having their own individual site collections for my sites, all the different websites for site collections. And there was a thought that it wasn't going to be it was loosely coupled, if you will, amongst all these sites. Then came the push to try to drive all of this content inside one site collection, forming the hierarchy that you see on the left-hand side. And it really wasn't scaled all that well to support that. It wasn't Microsoft's plan. The building block was the site collection object, this SP site object under the hood. So it's kind of a return back to its roots and some of the scalability that's now possible when you think in terms of lots and lots of site collections instead of just one with lots and lots of subsites. Mike, I think you're going to be treating this topic in terms of hub sites in the near future in 2019 as well. Would that be an accurate assumption on my part?
I think so, because I'll clearly be working with this kind of transformation and the use of hub sites in our environment, so I will be happy to talk about it.
Great. Hey, Mike, tell us a little bit about some of your other takeaways from SharePoint Fest 2018.
Let's see.
Any other highlights, any other surprises, pleasant or otherwise?
I guess the one, let me think about this.
Sure.
No, I said because of the project I was on, I was very focused on this, and so I don't have other takeaways ready to go. But I would say the quality of the presenters was very, very high. There are some sessions that they are recording. Of course, we had our my other user group, the Office 365 Adoption user group. We had our discussion panel Thursday night of SharePoint Fest, and we did record that. And I'll be putting that up on YouTube before the end of the year. And so I'll probably mention that again at our January meeting.
Cool.
So anyone who wants to see that is certainly welcome to. And I tried recording another session or two, and so I'm going to see if I can get those up as well.
Open question to the members that have attended today. We have about 12. Did any other members actually attend SharePoint Fest this year? I heard from some other colleagues and friends and other companies there were more people attending this year than ever before. Mike, was that your impression as well?
There certainly were a bunch of people there. I didn't get numbers on actual attendance, so I don't know for sure, but it certainly was well attended.
Good to hear. You guys, I'm laughing only because I'm looking at the questions list that's a part of the panel today. And Ofer is telling me that I have to tell everyone that I actually met him. Ofer Gal is not an imaginary character. He's a real person who attended one of the SharePoint morning sessions. Ofer, does that answer your question on the question list? Okay, good to know. Mike, thanks. I'm going to take over control, and we're going to go through the rest of the slides and get into that discussion talking about 2018 and 2019, okay?
Yes, there's one other thing I want to mention, which I mentioned in our pre-show discussion, and I want to share that with everyone, which is that I was using OneNote to draw the diagrams, and there's one thing that everyone should know about OneNote is that there won't be a OneNote 2019, but there will be, but there continues to be and will be OneNote for Windows. And if you haven't seen this article about that, basically on Windows, they're taking OneNote out of Office so that they can ship it on a separate cadence. And so right now, OneNote 2016, here it says, OneNote for Windows 10 will replace OneNote 2016 as the default OneNote experience. And so if you're looking for OneNote vNext, there'll be the constant minor upgrades to OneNote for Windows 10. And it won't be packaged or called OneNote 2019.
Is it still going to be part of Office then in terms of perception, or is it going to be considered part of the Windows operating system?
It's very much still a first-class member of the overall Office 365 productivity suite.
Okay.
And it's available on multiple platforms, web, Windows, Mac, mobile. So it's just, I think, a different flavor of the app that they decided would be better for them to maintain for Windows going forward.
Mike, I think you're going to have another little tour of OneNote in early January as well. What do you think of, or 2019?
Sounds good.
Everybody, the upshot is everybody's switching over to touchpads. Everybody can draw on their tablets or their laptops. Even my laptop I'm looking at right now. Better start learning some tips and tricks and etiquettes and things like that. Mike, today what you were drawing actually was coming across very, very nicely.
Now I'm just showing off.
Yes, Mike can draw a square. Okay.
That's the ink to shape capability in OneNote, and one of my favorites.
I was wondering how you drew such nice looking circles earlier. You
Yep.
had help. It's all AI powered.
I had lots of help.
All right, Mike, anything else on Office 365? Anything else on SharePoint Fest? Anything else on SharePoint Online and the hub sites? Or is it going to be watch for Michael in January, February 2019?
I'll continue to do news and updates through 2019. So let's turn this back to you.
All right, thank you, sir.
Sure.
Taking back control. Somebody let me know when you can see my screen again.
You're good.
Okay. We covered the SharePoint Big Picture and the SharePoint Fest. I already talked to you guys a little bit about Saturday mornings and the monthly ones that are going to happen in 2019. Let's look at what we did as a team, as a user group in 2018. January saw us starting to dig in and look at Microsoft Teams. Why? Because Microsoft needs us looking there. Why? Because it is turning out to be a real powerhouse tool that we've been using, Emtec has been using for this entire calendar year with very good success. Are there lessons learned? Yep. But still a very important tool to learn, to get to know and to add into your organization. We also did a sneak peek at SharePoint 2019, just a sneak peek. More on that later. We learned some SharePoint Designer tips and tricks. February saw us starting to understand about SharePoint's new JSON column formatting on all of its lists. In other words, Microsoft continues to evolve even things that are as fundamental as the lists, making them easier and easier to use, more and more powerful. We started working with Power Apps and with SharePoint Designer and with Flow working together to start formulating these 1-2 punches of functionality, these solutions. March saw us diving headlong into the SharePoint framework. In fact, several times. We also dove back into the fundamentals of SharePoint and covered SharePoint governance, tips, and other best practices that we were sharing across all of the membership. And we're finding this as a returning theme that comes back saying, hey, great, we're out at the cutting edge, we're out at the bleeding edge even on all these other technologies, but sometimes we have to remember the fundamentals about building this collaborative technology, this platform for everybody. So we will continue doing that in 2019, coming back to the roots, coming back to the core of SharePoint, which is those fundamental governance tips and best practices. April, springtime saw shifting over into getting a couple of demos on what was called attributes-based access control. As SharePoint gets bigger, as it gets more sophisticated, as more and more users roll in, as more and more content goes in, you need to have finer and finer control over access to that content. And there are organizations out there that have now developed an attributes-based access control. Some people call them access control expressions in other technologies, but it's becoming more complex. And we saw some vendors that were offering some demos to us. We continued diving into SharePoint framework. We also did a Power Apps 1-year review in April 2018 to see where Power Apps had come, and it had come a long way. May, going into the rest of the spring, we continued doing a Power Apps. We looked at the Power Apps on-premises gateway, which, if you recall, actually is what gives you the ability to create Power Apps up in your Office 365 environment, but still be able to access anything that is behind the firewall in your on-premise environment. SQL, SharePoint, Exchange, you name it. This on-premise gateway tool, while simple, is extremely powerful, very robust, and extremely secure for giving people access to content that's behind the firewall. Why did Microsoft do this? To give everybody the idea that the impetus that they needed to start formulating these hybrid environments that are part on-premise and part Office 365 up in the cloud in order to drive out all of the possible synergy that you can. Next, we had June going into the SharePoint framework again. Why? Because it's important. We also started talking about universal solution patterns for all types of SharePoint flows, whether they're SharePoint Designer workflows, list and otherwise, but also with this new tool, this new technology, Microsoft Flow, that's up in Office 365, those very same patterns can actually be adopted. And we as a users group started looking at some of those best practices. For those of you that are in the middle of using this, it became a chance for you to adopt. For those of you that are, it's still on the horizon, it's a chance for you to get ahead and understand what is, already start adopting some best practices even before the technology is available for you. Great. Mid-year, we're hitting July, it's in the middle of the summer. We're already diving into cognitive search. If you guys remember that really fun dogs and muffin demo that was given to us by another vendor. It was showing off the ability to use Azure machine learning, Azure cognitive services in direct conjunction with SharePoint picture libraries to upload images and have those images actually scanned and analyzed effortlessly to deliver descriptions of what it's seeing, and take that textual description and put it actually inside a SharePoint memo field. How cool is that? You're going to see us return to that again and again, because as we continue to power SharePoint with AI, the number of the kinds of solutions are endless and powerful. We also started diving in and benefiting from some of our members in July, showing us REST Sharp and the SharePoint.NET Core and what they were doing in that particular firm to start building out some really cool website functionality in their intranet. That was more additions from our existing membership. Ofer, thanks for that. August, we're starting to end the summer. We're heading into the fall. We had a demonstration of some tools. The Kemp-free load balancer for organizations that want to try to spin up a virtual machine-based or even a physical machine-based load balancer that are trying to scale their on-premise environments. That Kemp one was available, and we showed how to work with it. We also started looking at embedding Power Apps into SharePoint pages in August. Why was that? Because Microsoft had announced that Power Apps is going to be the de facto replacement for InfoPath forms. It's time for all of us to start realizing that's what's going to be used then going forward. We're going to be seeing all of our InfoPath forms instead be replaced with Power Apps forms for literally being embedded right onto our SharePoint pages, giving us interaction into those SharePoint lists, those SharePoint libraries. September, we dive into the fall, and now we're getting another demo again on this attributes-based access control, one particular one called Apps for Pro Planner. It was for MS Teams. We saw a really nice demo to set the stage for doing that that control administration. We also saw some more member demos from using Kendo UI, the .NET Core, and CSS. If you guys recall, that was a really great demo from Ofer on what they had done with it over the summer, over the last couple of months in their law offices. Some very cool dynamic functionality. We also included a little showcase on Microsoft Flow's powerful send HTTP request action, which is the one that everybody wants to add to their quiver of solutions that you can shoot at a problem if you're using Microsoft Flow. Because what that action does is allow you to create a programmatic HTTP request to any RESTful web service out on the internet. And now suddenly even functionality that you did not develop is now you can bring that into your SharePoint lists, libraries, your SharePoint solutions through Microsoft Flow by consuming this and using the send HTTP request action. Very cool. October, we're full into the fall now. There were Ignite 2018 highlight reels from a number of people that attended. And we started seeing some demos of an AI-powered Power App. That was a sneak peek for what was going on in November, those SharePoint Saturdays, those App into Saturday mornings. November, I didn't get the notes here in time, but you guys all covered that. Dina or Edie, can you guys just give me some highlights of what got covered in the November one a couple of weeks ago?
Oh, you're going to put me on the spot. Well, I know that we did talk through just kind of a really quick hit of some of the potential topics that we might want to cover next time, which was really helpful to go through and understand kind of what people would be interested in the next year. Some of the other topics that were covered were we kind of did a quick hit shout out to the Saturday morning crew that came in for the apps. There was a few SharePoint events that we talked through that early December, right? Like SharePoint Fest, Virtual Live 365, and some others. Ralph talked a little bit. Permal also went through Microsoft Teams governance. Ofer shared a demo on SharePoint Client ASP.NET Core on Linux, which was great. And Ralph was going to do the MS Graph update and tour, but he had some challenges with some of the licensing, so he's going to try and do that in the upcoming year. We actually had a couple of comments come in on the questions screen. Do you have that up on your screen, Mark? But actually, really good comment from Eric.
Oh yeah, Eric is saying a member, everybody. Eric in today's session said that we actually switched over to Kemp from F5 recently. We started to discover it before it was covered by this group, but this group's recommendation drove us to finalize the decision. Wow, I got goosebumps. I know that sounds dorky, but guys, it's a users group. If we're not serving a purpose to help guide in decisions, tips, tricks, best practices, we're kind of failing in our primary goal as a users group. So it's actually very warming to see that the users group is having this kind of a benefit for the members out there. Fantastic. Dina, thanks for that little summary of November. December, hey, we're back here today. But if we look at all of this, you guys, if I bring my cursor over here, we covered 25 topics across the entire spectrum of SharePoint in only 12 sessions. We covered SharePoint Basics. We covered Power Apps, Flow, SharePoint Framework. We even looked at Docker containers, if you recall. Back in May, we had another guest presenter from another consulting firm come in and talk about container-based virtualization. We covered some additional tools, including load balancers, including administrative tools. We talked about various kinds of solution patterns. We went back to covering governance. We went way ahead and started looking at AI dovetailing into SharePoint. And we got a chance to actually showcase a number of member-based solutions. That's a pretty event-filled users group, if you ask me, for a bunch of people that are just attending a 1-hour session one Wednesday every single month. Well done, everybody. What does it mean? Oh, there's one other thing I want to show you on the next slide. We also had something interesting happen that I simply just want to share with you guys. If we looked at January through February of 2018 in terms of total memberships and new members, there was one other, I won't call it a catastrophe, but we suffered something, a real struggle. In April, our meetup.com website that was driving this entire organization, we had 298 members and growing at that time, was yanked out from underneath us. They literally just shut us down, no backups, no client list, no nothing. And we had to start from scratch using LinkedIn, everybody. So that in May, we managed to recover 30 of our people that were here. And we were learning a very important lesson, that while we appeared to have 300 people, we really actually had a core of real attenders that were coming back again and again and again. So that May, we added about another 10, so that in June, we went up by 40. And then we slowly grew by 5 to 10 users, some of them existing, and they refound us, some of them brand new because they heard that things were happening here, until now here in December, I checked this morning, we are now sitting at a whopping 73 people for the year, from losing everybody in April, recovering some past members, those staunch, attendees, but we ended up with, I think, about 36 brand new members that weren't here before. We averaged 23 people every single session. So in 2017, we were averaging somewhere between 6 to 10 people per session. And now we're seeing that we were averaging 15, 27, 23, 28, 32, 26, 19. And on top of this, I think that this users group actually spawned it inspired another users group to start that's focused specifically on Power Apps and Flow. So I want to do a shout out to Craig Yankee, one of the co-founders of SharePoint Saturday, that in addition to Michael's Office 365 users group, in addition to the general Chicagoland SharePoint users group, there's now another users group that's being spun up. And we're hoping to continue to cultivate this synergy between all of these users groups. We are not competing. We're here to try to serve you guys, the users, the members, with different facets. And if we have to have a little bit more focus in Office 365, a little bit more focus in Power Apps and Flow, so be it. I'll be presenting even tomorrow at the inaugural session of this Chicago Power and Flow users group being held downtown, and I believe it is sponsored by Concurrency. So it's at 150 Wacker. You can try to do a Google search on that and find it, or look up Craig Yankee, you'll be able to find it. The point is there's a synergy that's being created by all of these users groups. That's what everybody that's a user, that's a member, should want. It's what we as consultants should also want, and it's absolutely what Microsoft wants, because it's that synergy that actually starts generating really useful and interesting things to happen. We've looked at 2018. Now it's time to spend literally the remainder of today's session talking about where to go in 2019. What Dina mentioned a few moments ago was that in November, we started asking members for ideas, and here's some of the feedback that we got. They want continued information, continued focus on Microsoft Teams and on Power Apps. That was very unambiguous, so we'll be continuing in that area. There was also interest in actually looking at SharePoint integrating with other line of business systems, maybe Salesforce, maybe others, but that could be a topic of conversation for 2019, where you, the users, are going to come back and say, hey, Mark, hey, guys, how do we integrate with this other line of business system? It's a new system, it's a legacy system, whatever. We want to know about it. Let's see if we can try to add to the knowledge base on how to perform those kinds of integrations. We also knew that everybody's starting to look, the people that have on-premise SharePoint, on-premises SharePoint, know they have to start facing up with SharePoint migrations. That 2019 just came out a month ago, 6 weeks ago, and now people are going to be tasked with migrating from wherever they're at. We have some customers, hey guys, they're in SharePoint 2007, and they're getting ready to actually migrate to SharePoint 2019 at the beginning of calendar year 2019. So migrations are definitely going to be on the docket for January, February, March, because it's going to be on everyone else's mind. Based on my own experience in the last year with this users group, I also want to give you guys a tour of SP 2019. So expect that in January and February. We're going to take it off, not in huge buckets, but in smaller pieces. We're going to start touring what's inside SharePoint 2019. We're going to start revisiting the popular hybrid functionality that we think you should try. What do I mean by that? Hybrid search between SharePoint Online and SharePoint on-premises. Hybrid sites, hybrid site collections, hybrid user profiles are areas where customers are starting to get large amounts of functionality out and see the virtue of actually maintaining these hybrid environments. So we're going to talk about those almost like use cases. Here's a scenario, here's what one customer did, here's how it all turned out, so that you guys can start setting the stage for creating your own hybrid environments if your company is thinking along those routes. Last but not least, we're going to continue to coerce Ralph, who is not here today, that he needs to show us more about the Microsoft Graph, this great big unified RESTful web service that's available online that you can tap into to ask anything and everything about your SharePoint, your Office 365 based information. And there I want to open the doors up. We now have what look like 3, 6, 9, a full 12 people attending at least. What other ideas in both the near future, mid-year, and in towards the end of the year do you guys want to see us focus on in this users group? Anybody? And I'm looking at questions now. Let's see. I joined LinkedIn specifically for this group. Dan, thanks for that. Is there a website someplace I can go to see all the MS user groups for Chicagoland? Karen, I'd have to say you're into LinkedIn and you're going to do a search for groups, Chicago, Microsoft. But at the very least, you've got Michael Blumenthal's Office 365. You've got this Chicagoland SharePoint users group. You've got Craig Yonkey's, Jahnke, Craig Yonkey's inaugural Power Apps and Flow users group starting tomorrow. Go search for that.
There's also
and I'm starting to see
Doug Heminger and AJ Ram run, which is another Chicago Office 365 user group.
Oh, okay. Mike, what was the name of that one?
It's on Meetup. Meetup is another great place to search for user groups, especially. The reason they killed off this one because they only have virtual meetings and they're big on in-person meetings. But it's a great place to search for those. But it's the one run by Doug Heminger and AJ Ram, and let me find the name for that.
Hey, Michael, why don't you send that to us, and then we'll go ahead and post that on the user group, or you can actually post it directly to the LinkedIn user group as well. If anybody has any resources, right, feel free to post them for other group members. This is not the only user group game in town, and like I said, Mark is going to be attending another user group that's launching in Chicago, so it's great to have those additional resources to post questions.
In fact, if you guys have ideas for what you want to see on a SharePoint Saturday morning, not just Power Apps, but other things, working with Teams, working with Power Apps, working with flows, anything that we want to try to cover in, say, 2 to 4 hours, but never more than that. The whole idea is that, you know, I want Saturdays off too, but I don't mind going to DeVry and using a classroom for 2-3 hours in order to cover a topic in more depth. And then we get the rest of our weekend off, and you ended up enhancing your knowledge and experience, but it didn't cost you the weekend. It doesn't get any better than that. Anybody, Craig, what would you like to see happen in 2019 in this team? Dan, what would you like to see? Eric, any ideas on additional topics that you already know from you or your colleagues at work are saying, oh yeah, we need to start understanding something more? I see Edie is posting a LinkedIn group for us, for the Chicagoland SharePoint users group.
Shauna just responded, and if you want, I can open up the line. Sometimes people prefer not to speak out loud, but more than happy if you want to raise your hand, I can open up your line and we can start having some conversation.
Sure. Shauna, is that something that you want to explain in more detail? You're asking, would I like to know about any content indexing that Power Apps will need for AI? What do you mean by content indexing there? Can you give us me a...
Yeah, Shauna, I'm going to try and unmute you. Give me 1 second. Shauna, you should be able to talk.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm a technical writer, and I'm looking at how to position content for use by AI in SharePoint systems. And if you could talk about that, that would be great.
Give us a little scenario, and everybody, it's wonderful having you.
Yes. So scenario would be like you write FAQs, you index them, you need to have them available for AI apps to access. So when I say content indexing, I'm not talking about indexing of files, I'm talking about actual text indexing.
And Power Apps is acting like a user interface into, say, a SharePoint list that's containing all of this information?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then it's being indexed, but let's say you've got AI bots of some kind that are also accessing that content, that FAQ content, that oftentimes is what populates, what powers those AI bots. And that, yeah, I could see doing I would be giddy to do a demonstration of an AI bot in early January or February, and showing how, showing what's under the hood in an AI bot. Ultimately, it's a Q&A stuff, it's an FAQ stuff, but it's the pattern matching that makes the AI bots really cool, that it's looking at what users types, it tries to come up with this sentiment, this fingerprint of what they're asking for, then it uses that fingerprint to go out and look through all of the questions it already knows about to try to find the closest matching sentiment of what's being requested, and then pass back the response. And when people start to understand that, is that what you would like to see? Is that what you're describing, Shauna?
Well, I'm coming from the other end, and I need to supply the information for the AI bot to actually pick it up.
Ah, okay. All right, I see that happening in January, February. That's a fantastic suggestion.
A quick question there. Is the Q&A Maker Azure bot service involved in that?
So I say that again?
There's an Azure service called Q&A Maker. Is that involved in there?
Sure. And any FAQ package like Zendesk or any of them, the question is how do you write the technical information so that an AI bot will pick it up? You know, that comes out of a human being's head. So.
Yeah, like are there best practices that are involved in the actual content itself that makes it conducive for the Q&A bot or any other type of bot to be able to parse that information out? I understand what you're asking, because what's happening under the hood is you're parsing the sentence out into nouns, verbs, predicates. You're trying to extract the sentiment from that, and are there ways that you can word your sentences that make that easier or make that harder? Am I hearing you right?
There's some resources we have that could potentially, we could even maybe have them join us for a few minutes.
Sure.
Next time. They have some experience with, you know, building bots, Shauna, and then maybe we could even just throw them the question and supply an answer there. There are ways so that this way, depending on what somebody types in, that'll come up versus not, right? So you want to make sure it finds the right content for the question. Yeah,
it's a chance for us to bring in some other colleagues that are also working on these things on a daily basis. That's a great suggestion, Shauna. Let me see at some of the other questions that are rolling in quickly. Dan, one question: how best to design and present content, libraries, metadata, lists versus libraries, documents versus web pages would be a fantastic topic that could probably consume an entire hour in January, February, or March. Best practices type session. Yeah, Dan, I agree with you. AT&T, purposes don't have access to any new functionality. Craig, question for you at AT&T. Is it strictly 2013 on-premise still? And do you have, is there—
Craig, you're unmuted. You can speak, Craig.
Yeah, that's what we have now. 2013 on-prem. We have OneDrive with some very limited news feed type sites, but I guess that's going away too. So really we're just 2013 on-prem.
On-prem. What I want to get from you, Craig, are what are some of the current business problems that you guys are still being asked to solve, and what you have available is the SharePoint on-prem 2013 technology. Those are the kinds of questions that I'm keen to try to answer, because ultimately, and this is for everybody, ultimately we have what we have for tools, and our job as not members of this users group, but our jobs as consultants, developers on teams is we have to solve business problems. That's our job. We're given a set of tools, and what I'm sure members of this group don't want to hear all the time is, oh, the problem's easily solved if you had the newer tool. Nope, I don't want to think that way. I want to think we have the tools that we have, period. If it's SharePoint on-prem 2013, so be it. I want to know what the problems are that you guys are being tasked with, the sticky ones that you need a little help with, the ones that you come to a users group and say, guys, this is all we got, and here's the problem we're being asked to solve. Any ideas? That's what users groups try to accomplish. That's what that BYOP is stand for. Craig, is there anything that you're willing or able to share with us about some of the, if you have to generalize a little bit, feel free, what kinds of problems do you find yourselves trying to solve on a regular basis where, with totally ignoring what version of SharePoint you've got?
Yeah, so I mean, we have tens of thousands of site collections, and so there's all kinds of skill levels within the company in terms of SharePoint. And what I do is I run the internal user group, and we solve a lot of problems with JavaScript and workflow, because SharePoint itself, it's massive, it's awesome, it has so much functionality, but people want it to do more. We don't have budget for IT to create applications. So I've been spending the last couple of years educating my internal user group on how to use workflow and JavaScript to create business applications inside of SharePoint.
Now, even with SharePoint on premises, there may be at least the possibility of exploring these single page apps. Have you guys been exploring spas and developing web apps using that kind of an approach? Some sort of a JavaScript framework. It could be Angular, I think the most current version, like that.
Yeah, that's what I'd like to talk about next year then, because when we create single page apps, we're doing it outside of SharePoint with, say, Angular. And it would be great to be able to do that in the SharePoint framework, that's the wrong term to use, inside the SharePoint platform.
In the SharePoint platform, yeah. In fact, we've been working internally, Craig, on just those kinds of POCs using not the older versions of Angular, but Angular 7, and which is kind of a big rewrite from Angular. I'll call it Angular JS, just to distinguish it. And I would love to spend time in early 2019 showing that you've got options for building these MVC patterned applications, either using the existing tools available to us like Power Apps, SharePoint, and Flow as the model, the view, and the controller, these loosely coupled solutions, but also it's still very possible in even on-premise environments to build brand new Angular 7 based, super sexy, super scalable, super responsive based solutions using what other people might consider to be an older technology and still get all of the benefits out of it. What version of Angular are you guys using in-house right now, Craig? Is it Angular JS or one of the Angular 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7?
Well, our standards team has moved us from JS all the way through 7, so we have we have applications in every version of Angular. And,
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. But that's actually exciting. Now, the one other thing that I heard you mention was that you have tens of thousands of site collections, which tells me that you guys spin up site collections on a regular basis, not just for individual groups, but maybe for projects that you're working on are actually contained inside site collections.
Yes, it's enormous. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And that actually, you guys are actually following an established Microsoft best practice there, where like I mentioned earlier, the fundamental building block is the site collection, not the site, not the web application, but the site collections. I'm going to coerce you into actually being doing a member presentation in early 2019. So we've got some more great feedback. Watch for building web application development, SPA development using Angular in early 2019, because it's needed by members and because we're also super excited as the presenters and founders to be showing how this can actually be done as well. What else, everybody? When I first asked you a few minutes ago, the screen exploded. We ended up with like 7 or 8 or 9 different questions popping up. What else is everybody curious about even? Third-party tools that you want to see us try to bring in as guests to deliver, or other technologies that are Microsoft related but not necessarily SharePoint, but in your organization the two are going to start butting up against each other and you want to figure out if you can stick them together, like the Microsoft graph inside SharePoint or stuff like that. Oh, and while people are trying to answer, Craig, I'm coming back to you. When you guys build those apps, is all the data being stored in SharePoint, or is the goal that the data is also stored in, I don't know, SQL Server or something like this, and you're trying to surface it inside SharePoint as an application in addition to any data you might also be storing in SharePoint?
All of the above. We have, solutions that are purely SharePoint. We have solutions where SharePoint is the content management system and say Angular or something else is the front end. And we also are trying to, like you mentioned, surface, database, or API generated data inside of SharePoint. Right.
Because oftentimes the data is never, it's never as sexy or easy as, the data is all in one repository. No, it's got to be in an ERP system and in SharePoint and in some other SQL database. And your job is to host a web app in SharePoint because it's easy, but you're really trying to lasso and wrangle all of that data into a set of screens that people can interact with that makes sense, that they're easy to use and easy to manage. Good.
We used to try to move data around. Now we leave it where it is and just call it.
Yeah, exactly. Leave it where it is and find ways to touch it. How many other people are interested in, let's say an Angular 7 web app demo where SharePoint is the primary repository? It's going to act as the primary quote unquote model. That's where the information that represents the universe in an MVC model, MVC solution is going to be stored. Let me know. What about security? What about anything like that? Are there any people that have needs they want to start talking about? The GDCR stuff that's going on in Europe, stuff like that. Are those topics that we should be returning to for people? We covered one time, I think, this last year, and I wasn't sure if it resonated with anybody or if it was just, pointless. I don't want to spend time on things that people don't want to work on.
What's the level of interest in Bing for Business?
I missed that one. Repeat again.
What's the level of interest in Bing for Business? For my other user group, we've got a speaker talking to us about Bing for Business in February. If there's interest here, I'm sure the presenter would be happy to present here as well.
Oh, Bing for Business. Yeah, I'd be keen on seeing stuff like that. SharePoint as a collaboration technology is always about search being one of the top pieces of functionality. So is this Bing turned inward on a company, kind of like the old Google search appliances, that kind of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Mike, I'm going to tee that one up as well. You guys, I'm actually going to close the session at 12:55 in only 4 more minutes. So we're going to start doing a wrap up. Back one more time to, I'm going to cover these next 2 slides first. We're covering the challenges. Merry Christmas. See you all on January 16th. Don't go yet. What I want you to focus on is this. We got a lot done this year as a team, as a users group. It's a lot to be proud of, and I just wanted to offer everybody that attended today my heartfelt thanks. It's not a users group unless users attend. They don't attend unless it's useful. So we must be doing something right. And my thanks to you for continuing to be members that are invested in this users group. I hope you guys have a really enjoyable holiday season, a safe one as well. We'll see you on January 16th for our next one. Watch in the near future for the itinerary for that, but continue to offer up any suggestions on what else you want to see us cover in this users group, at least, 6 months from now in the early parts of 2019. Anybody else have any other questions, comments, concerns, or contributions? Any other members? Otherwise, Craig, thanks. Dan, thanks. Eric, thank you. Jim, Ofer, Peter, thank you. Shauna, great suggestions. And Tom, thanks everybody for attending. It's been a marvelous year. We're really pleased to continue. Emtec is really pleased to continue hosting and sharing this particular users group. Congratulations to the new users groups that are being spawned off of this, and we'll see you on January 16th, okay?